The Galactic Empire had charted every star, catalogued every fleet, and crushed every rebellion. Or so they believed. Until the scanners went blind. Until a ship appeared where no record claimed it should exist. No registry, no designation, no history, just steel, silence, and the sudden death of an entire Imperial armada. One unmarked vessel had cut through cruisers and dreadnoughts alike, leaving only wreckage drifting in the void. The admirals called it impossible. The Senate called it treason. But the survivors, those who lived long enough to speak, whispered only one word: human. What kind of people could build a ghost ship powerful enough to make an empire tremble? And more terrifying still, if this was only one ship, what would happen when the rest of humanity arrived? Captain Elias Rourke never thought he'd leave Earth. Born in the shipyards of Luna, he grew up watching his father rivet steel plates to starship hulls while his mother ran calculations for thruster arrays. His future seemed certain. Build, not fly. Stay grounded, not soar. And yet the galaxy had a way of dragging humans where they were least expected. Elias wasn't a soldier by trade. He wasn't a statesman or a scientist destined to change the stars. He was a mechanic, a man who kept engines humming and reactors stable. His life was measured not in battles fought, but in hours spent beneath the roar of plasma drives, oil staining his hands, and the steady rhythm of machines that obeyed when nothing else did. That was before the Empire came. When the Galactic Dominion discovered Earth, they dismissed humanity as primitive, a species with fire still under its fingernails and dirt clinging to its boots. Their fleets shadowed the skies. Their emissaries demanded compliance, and their fleets made demonstrations of imperial justice that left cities smoldering. Humanity was not yet conquered, but the leash was already tightening. Elias joined the resistance almost by accident. A freighter scheduled for inspection never returned. His sister was aboard. By the time reports reached Luna, it was clear the Empire did not negotiate with defiance. They erased it. That grief hollowed him, but it also gave him purpose. When the call went out for skilled hands to join a project so secret even its name was whispered, Elias didn't hesitate. He boarded an unmarked shuttle, left behind the only world he had ever known, and descended into the hidden shipyards carved deep into Saturn's shadow. There, humanity's answer to the Empire was being forged. At first, Elias thought it was madness. A single vessel? Against a dominion that ruled half the stars? But the engineers and tacticians around him spoke with conviction. This was not to be a war of numbers. It was to be a war of precision, of defiance, of proof. Humanity would not match the Empire ship for ship. They would build one ship the Empire could not match at all. Months bled into years. Elias lost track of time in the endless cycle of welding, calibrating, testing. He came to know every bolt and circuit of the vessel that had no name. She was sleek, predatory, armed with weapons Earth had never dared to unleash and systems the Empire had never imagined. She was a ghost, invisible to scanners, silent to interceptors. To Elias, she was more than steel. She was a promise. And yet, doubt lingered. He often found himself staring out at Saturn's rings, wondering if this single ship could ever matter. The Empire's fleets numbered in the thousands. Their arrogance was carved into the fabric of the galaxy. What could one vessel truly accomplish, even armed with humanity's last, desperate ingenuity? Then came the signal. A message intercepted, one meant for the Dominion's admirals. The Empire was mobilizing, shifting fleets to crush a minor rebellion on the rim. 1,000 ships, they boasted. Enough firepower to burn worlds clean in an afternoon. For the resistance, the message was an opportunity. For Elias, it was a reckoning. The nameless ship was finished. She had waited in silence, hidden in the dark, her engines cold and her weapons untouched. Now she was to be tested. Not against simulations, not against empty space, but against the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever assembled. Elias stood at the viewport as the engines thrummed to life for the first time. He should have felt pride. Instead, he felt only the weight of his sister's absence and the silence of billions who would never know his name. Because this wasn't about glory. It wasn't even about victory. It was about proving once and for all that humanity would not kneel. And somewhere, deep in his chest, Elias dared to believe one unmarked ship might just be enough. The unmarked ship slipped from Saturn's shadow like a predator leaving its den. To the galaxy, it was nothing. No transponder, no history, no record. But to Elias Rourke, who had watched her take shape from bare steel to battle-ready, she was a living thing. A blade forged in secret. A weapon built not for conquest, but for proof. The crew was small, barely 100 men and women. Not soldiers, not warriors. Engineers, pilots, survivors of a dozen tragedies inflicted by the Empire. Each one carried a scar. Each one carried a reason to fight. And Elias, for all his grease-stained past, found himself their chief engineer. The one who knew her better than anyone else. The order came down in whispers. Set course for the rim. Intercept the Dominion fleet. It sounded absurd, even spoken aloud. One ship against 1,000. But no one laughed. Not anymore. The jump to the rim was silent, almost anticlimactic. No fanfare, no banners. Just a burst of light and the ripple of space folding around the ship. When they emerged, the void was filled with fire. The Dominion fleet stretched across the stars, a wall of steel and arrogance. Cruisers bristling with plasma cannons, carriers so vast their shadows eclipsed moons. Interceptors swarmed in endless formations, their engines stitching streaks of light across the dark. The rebellion's world hung below, a small, defiant colony daring to resist the Empire's grasp. From orbit, it looked peaceful, unaware of the death waiting above its skies. Elias's stomach tightened. The scale of it was suffocating. This is madness. What can we possibly do here? The captain's voice cut through the silence. Calm, unflinching. We don't fight them head on. We bleed them, confuse them, make them doubt. It was strategy born of desperation. War not of numbers, but of psychology. The ship wasn't built to match firepower. It was built to disappear, to strike unseen, to turn certainty into fear. And so they began. The first strike was surgical. A battleship on the fleet's fringe, her shields flickering as she cycled power. One lance of coherent energy, silent, invisible until the moment of impact, cut through her hull. The battleship didn't explode. It simply came apart, its heart cored out in a single flash. No one saw the shot. No one traced its source. To the Dominion fleet, it was as if one of their proudest warships had simply failed. Confusion rippled across the comms. Admirals demanded reports. Engineers scrambled. Interceptors scoured empty space. The unmarked ship moved before they could focus, already vanishing into shadow, her stealth systems bending light and scattering signals. Elias watched the readings vanish from their sensors as though they had never existed. It was working. Strike after strike followed. A carrier's munitions bay erupted into fire, spilling burning wreckage across its escorts. A dreadnought's reactor went dark mid-maneuver, sending it drifting helplessly into the gravity well below. A line of cruisers panicked, turning their guns on each other when false echoes ghosted across their screens. Each blow was a whisper, a ghostly hand plucking at the threads of a mighty empire. And still, Elias felt the pressure building, because every strike, every disappearance, was a risk. Every maneuver brought them closer to discovery. The Dominion wasn't stupid. Arrogant, yes, but not stupid. They began to tighten their net. Interceptors swarmed in overlapping patrols. Long-range scanners pierced deeper into the void. Commanders shouted about phantom enemies, demanding the impossible, find the ghost in the dark. The noose was closing. Hours stretched like years. Sweat ran into Elias's eyes as he hunched over the engineering console, rerouting power, pushing the ship's systems past every tested limit. Hull plating groaned with stress. Reactors hummed at the edge of instability. More than once, alarms shrieked through the corridors. Too close, shields flaring under stray fire, engines overheating from emergency burns. At one point, a flight of Dominion interceptors swept so near their hull that Elias swore he could see the gleam of their wings through the viewport. He held his breath, muscles locked, praying the stealth systems held. They did, but barely. When the interceptors veered away, laughter broke in the command deck, half relief, half hysteria. Humans had never been so close to annihilation, never been so close to proving they couldn't be caught. But the Empire was learning, and with learning came fury. The admirals unleashed the fleet in a burn across the system, sweeping their fire in every direction. Civilian colonies lit up beneath orbital bombardments. Ships suspected of harboring rebels were annihilated. If they couldn't catch the ghost, they would punish the stars themselves. The command deck trembled with the thunder of weapons fire. Warning lights bathed the crew in blood-red hues, each alarm a reminder of how close they stood to annihilation. The Dominion fleet had found them. Interceptors swarmed like hornets, plasma bolts lashing against their shields. Dreadnoughts encircled, their cannons spitting fire that shook the void. For every evasive maneuver, 100 more threats appeared. The noose had tightened, and the unmarked ship was bleeding. Elias's console screamed with overload warnings. Coolant lines ruptured, hull plating buckled. The stealth fields, their greatest defense, were failing. "We can't take another volley!" Elias shouted, his voice raw with fear. The captain didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the tactical display on the wall of steel closing in. Calm, steady, resolved. "Prepare the core." A hush fell over the deck. Even through the chaos, the weight of those words silenced every breath. The core, their last resort, the weapon that was never meant to be fired. Elias's hands trembled over the activation sequence. He remembered the engineers' warnings, the endless debates. The core wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a tearing open of space, a weaponized collapse of matter itself. A strike so devastating it could erase fleets, or consume its wielder in the process. "You're asking me to light a star in the middle of their formation," Elias whispered. The captain's gaze never wavered. "No. I'm asking you to remind the galaxy who humans are." The decision was made. The unmarked ship dove headlong into the Dominion formation, engines howling, shields flaring against the storm. Plasma fire scoured their hull, an interceptor exploded against their flank, rocking them sideways. Every second was borrowed time. Elias's fingers flew, bypassing safeties, feeding impossible power into the core. He could feel it beneath the ship, rumbling like a heart on the edge of rupture. The air tasted of metal and ozone. "Core at 80%, he called out. His voice cracked, but his hands didn't stop. The captain stood tall at the viewport as the Dominion dreadnoughts loomed. Hundreds of guns turned toward them. 1,000 ships focused their fury on one. "Hold steady," the captain said softly. "To the crew, to the ship, to humanity itself. Let them see us." The first dreadnought fired. The blast slammed into their shields, ripping power from their reserves. Panels burst into sparks. Elias cried out as his station jolted beneath him, but the numbers climbed, 90%, 95%. They were seconds from destruction. A voice broke across the comms, an Imperial admiral, snarling with rage. You are nothing. One ship cannot defy an empire. You will be erased, and your species with you." Elias almost laughed, though it came out as a sob. They'd been erased before, hadn't they? By disease, by war, by famine. By every trial the universe could conjure. And every time, somehow, humans endured. "Core at 100%, Elias shouted. The captain's hand hovered over the final control. His voice was quiet, steady, almost reverent. "For Earth." And he pressed it. The void screamed. Light erupted, pure and terrible, brighter than any sun. The Dominion fleet shuddered as reality itself tore open before them. Ships vanished in silence, swallowed whole. Cruisers cracked apart like kindling. Dreadnoughts, proud and invincible, folded into themselves, their screams cut short as the core devoured everything in its reach. The Empire's wall of steel became a graveyard of fire. For a heartbeat, Elias felt nothing. No sound, no breath, no thought. Only the awe of watching the impossible become real. Then the shockwave struck. The unmarked ship bucked violently, its hull groaning like a wounded beast. Systems failed in cascades. Alarms blared as the core's power rippled back through their veins. Elias fought desperately to stabilize, hands burning on controls, vision blurring with smoke and sweat. They had unleashed a storm, and they were not immune to its fury. When the light finally dimmed, silence followed. The Dominion fleet was gone, not broken, not scattered, gone. 1,000 ships erased in an instant. Wreckage drifted in mute testimony to the impossible. The unmarked ship floated at the center, scarred and battered, her crew clinging to life. Elias slumped over his console, lungs burning, hands numb. The numbers steadied. The ship still lived. Somehow. The captain's voice, hoarse but unshaken, broke the silence. "Transmit it." Elias turned, blinking through the haze. "Transmit what?" The captain met his eyes, and for the first time Elias saw not calm, but fire. The record, the proof. Let the galaxy know what one human ship did today. Elias hesitated only a moment before obeying. Fingers moved across the console, and a signal burst from their battered hull. Images of the annihilated fleet, the core's fury, the words scrawled across debris. Human. Far away, in halls of Imperial command, admirals stared in silence at the reports. In colonies across the stars, whispers began to spread. And in the darkness of the unmarked ship, Elias Rourke closed his eyes, tears cutting through the grime on his face. They had not just survived. They had not just fought. They had made the Empire tremble. The battlefield hung in silence. Where once the void had boiled with plasma fire and the screams of ships dying, there was now only drifting debris and the faint echoing hum of systems trying to cling to life. The Imperial fleet, once the pride of an empire spanning hundreds of stars, was gone. Erased, not by another armada, not by some ancient weapon dredged up from forgotten wars, but by one ship, by ours. Captain Elias stood on the bridge, his uniform torn, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. He had expected death tonight, not glory, not victory, just the quiet extinguishing of a human spark, swallowed by an empire too vast to fight. And yet, here they stood, bloodied but unbroken. The crew stared at him, waiting for words, for answers, for meaning. But all Elias could manage was a whisper. "They'll come again." Because he knew this wasn't over. The Empire would not forget the humiliation. They would not forgive the fear. They had lost more than ships tonight. They had lost certainty. For centuries, their war doctrine rested on the premise that no species, no rebellion, no fleet could ever truly oppose them. And then a human vessel, a forgotten, unlogged, unremarkable ship, had shattered that illusion in a single night. Elias turned his gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, admirals were already rewriting orders. Somewhere, rulers were already whispering about humanity, not as subjects, not as pests, but as something else, something unpredictable, something dangerous, something worth fearing. The comm crackled. A young ensign's voice trembled. "Sir, the Empire broadcast just went dark. Their channels are silent." Silent. The galaxy would not know the details, not yet. But rumors, oh, they would spread like wildfire. Rumors of a fleet erased, of an empire staggered, of humans, fragile, stubborn, reckless humans, doing the impossible. For the first time, Elias allowed himself a smile. Not of triumph, not of arrogance, but of quiet, bone-deep defiance. Humanity had always been underestimated, mocked for its primitive beginnings, for its fractured history, for its unremarkable biology. Yet it was precisely those flaws, the scars, the stubbornness, the refusal to bow, that had carried them here. He leaned closer to the viewport, speaking not to his crew, not even to himself, but to the stars. They'll learn. One way or another. They'll learn what it means to face us. Behind him, the crew began to stir. Some wept in silence. Some slumped into chairs, too exhausted to process survival. But others straightened, as if something inside them had ignited. They had lived through the night the Empire was humbled. They carried that memory now, and no fleet, no emperor, no weapon could erase it. News would spread. The oppressed, the enslaved, the forgotten, the galaxy's billions who had lived under imperial shadow would hear whispers. Whispers of a ship that erased an empire's fleet. Whispers of a people too stubborn to die. Hope, like fire, is a dangerous thing. Elias finally turned to his crew, voice steady at last. "Set course for Earth. We've lit the fire. Now we see what it burns." The stars stretched before them, cold, infinite, watching. The Empire would regroup. They would retaliate. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most powerful force had tasted fear, and fear is contagious.